The sound of laughter echoed through the village every time she passed. It wasn't the warm laughter of joy, but the cruel, mocking kind that stung deeper than any wound. She was known as nothing more than the farmer's daughter, a girl with rough, calloused hands from working in the fields, clothes patched too many times to count, and a quiet face that rarely lifted to meet anyone's eyes. Children pointed and giggled, mimicking the way she walked. Women whispered to each other as she carried baskets of grain. Men smirked and called out, "Who would ever want a girl like that?" Every corner of her world reminded her that she was poor, that she was different, that she was unwanted. But what none of them knew was that behind her silence lived a fire, a determination burning hotter with every insult. Every laugh, every rejection. She never shouted back. She never argued. She never tried to defend herself. Instead, she carried their words like invisible stones on her shoulders, letting the weight press her down, but not break her. She promised herself in the stillness of the night, while staring at the stars above her family's tiny farm. One day, I'll return, and when I do, they will no longer laugh. The villagers never imagined that the girl they dismissed could become anything more than what she was. To them, destiny was fixed. The poor remained poor, and the privileged remained powerful. But fate has a way of twisting paths, of planting seeds in the most unlikely soil. Years passed. Seasons changed. The mocking laughter continued, but so did her determination. The girl worked harder, dreamed bigger, and carried within her heart a secret, one that no one in the village could have guessed. And then, one day, she disappeared. At first, people noticed her absence, but soon they forgot. Life went on as usual. The farmer's daughter became nothing more than a memory, a name whispered occasionally with disdain. But time has a way of revealing truths when no one expects them. Because many years later, on a bright morning when the villagers gathered in the square, a carriage appeared at the edge of the road. Heads turned, eyes widened, and when the door opened, out stepped a woman so radiant, so transformed, that no one could believe their eyes. Wait, could it be? The narrator's voice falls heavy with suspense. She was the same farmer's daughter they once laughed at. But now she had returned, carrying a secret that would silence the entire village forever. From the moment she could walk, the farmer's daughter's life was tied to the earth. Her tiny hands learned to pluck weeds before she could even braid her own hair. By the time other children were playing with toys, she was carrying baskets of vegetables from the field to the market, her bare feet coated in dust. Her father worked tirelessly, bent under the sun from dawn until nightfall. Though he never had much, he gave her what he could. A roof to sleep under, food to fill her stomach, and stories at night that told her life could be bigger than what they saw. He would look at her with pride and whisper, "You are more than this soil, my child. Don't let their laughter decide who you are." But the villagers thought differently. To them, poverty was shame, and shame was permanent. Whenever she walked to the well with her clay pot, whispers followed. Girls her age smirked at her ragged dress. Boys mocked her rough hands. Shopkeepers often gave her less change, knowing she was too timid to argue. She would lower her gaze, swallow her words, and walk away in silence. Yet inside her, the pain grew heavier each day. She would come home after hours of insults, sit by the flickering oil lamp, and stare at her books. Books were her escape, her doorway to another world. She read about leaders, inventors, and women who had risen above impossible odds. And though the villagers called her just a farmer's child, in her heart she knew she was meant for something greater. At night, when the stars painted the sky, she dreamed. She dreamed of wearing clothes that weren't patched, of speaking in rooms where her voice would matter, of walking into places where people would look at her with respect instead of pity. But when the morning came, the harsh reality of her life returned. The weight of responsibility pressed on her young shoulders. Her father, growing older, relied on her more with each passing season. She plowed, she harvested, she carried, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. Every coin they earned was stretched thin, and still the villagers mocked. "Who will marry her?" they would whisper. "She will die in the same mud she was born in." Each cruel word was like a thorn piercing her heart, but instead of crushing her, those thorns planted seeds. Seeds of determination, seeds of silent rebellion. She hid her pain well. To her father she smiled, laughed when he told stories, and reassured him that she was fine. But when she was alone, tears would slip down her cheeks as she whispered into the night, "One day, They will see. One day I'll be more than what they think. And in those quiet promises to herself, the foundation of her transformation began to take root. What the villagers could never imagine was that this same girl, mocked and dismissed, would one day rise higher than anyone expected. She was not just the farmer's daughter. She was a storm waiting for her moment. And when that moment came, the village would never laugh again. The farmer's daughter lived with the whispers of mockery following her everywhere she went. It was not once or twice, but every day, small cuts that dug deeper into her soul. At the village well, where women gathered to fill their pots, she felt their stares before she even arrived. Her clay jar balanced on her head, her clothes faded from too many washes, her feet bare on the cracked earth. As she bent to draw water, one of the women wrinkled her nose. "Keep your distance," the woman muttered loudly. "She smells of the fields," another smirked. "That's all she'll ever be. A girl who stinks of earth and sweat." Laughter rippled across the group. The farmer's daughter kept her head bowed, gripping the rope tighter, her jaw clenched. She wanted to shout, to remind them that the same hands they mocked grew the very food they ate. But she said nothing. Instead, she filled her jar in silence and walked away as their laughter trailed behind her. At the marketplace, the insults were sharper. Shopkeepers often shortchanged her, tossing coins on the ground rather than placing them in her hand. Children of wealthy families followed her, mocking her patched dress. "Careful," one sneered. "Her rags might tear if she bends too low." Another chimed in, "Maybe she should beg instead of shop. That's all she's good for." The cruel words echoed as she clutched her small basket of vegetables. Each coin was earned with backbreaking labor, each item bought with sacrifice. Still she bore their laughter in silence, swallowing her pride like a bitter seed. Even among her peers there was no escape. Other young girls, dressed in bright fabrics and shiny bracelets, giggled when she passed. They spoke loudly about who was betrothed, who had suitors, and who was considered beautiful. Then with deliberate cruelty they would glance at her and whisper, "Who would want her? No dowry, no beauty, no future." Their laughter stung more than the sun on her skin, and yet she never responded. She carried her pain like an invisible weight, too proud to let them see her cry. But inside she was breaking. Nights were the hardest. She would sit outside her small hut staring at the stars that shimmered above and whisper, "Why me? Why must I carry this shame? Why can't they see me for who I am inside?" Tears fell quietly, unseen by the world, soaking into the soil that had always been her only companion. Her father noticed her silence, but never her tears. "You are strong, my child," he would say, trying to comfort her. "They laugh because they do not know your worth. One day you will prove them wrong." His words were like fragile seeds planted in her heart, seeds that she held on to with all the strength she could muster. What the villagers did not know was that every insult, every cruel laugh, every mocking glance was shaping her into something greater. They thought their words were breaking her, but in truth, they were building the fire that would one day burn through their arrogance. One evening, as she carried water back from the well, her path crossed a group of boys. They deliberately stepped in front of her, blocking her way. One kicked at the base of her jar, spilling water over her dress. "Careful, farmer's girl," he shouted with mock laughter. "Maybe you should carry mud instead of water. It matches you better." The others roared with laughter as she stood frozen, drenched, and humiliated. Her fists clenched, but her voice failed her. Instead of fighting back, she picked up the jar, now cracked at the rim, and walked away. That night she did not cry. She stared at the cracked jar beside her and whispered, "This is how they see me. Broken. Worthless. But they are wrong. One day I will return, and when I do, they will not laugh." Her silent vow marked the turning of a tide. They mocked her as a poor farmer's child, blind to the strength she carried within. But life has a way of humbling those who laugh too loudly. For the girl they ridiculed was not destined to remain in the mud. She was destined to rise, and her rise would silence them all. The day began like any other, with the farmer's daughter rising before dawn to tend the fields. The sun was barely touching the horizon when she carried a bundle of firewood to the village. But fate had planned differently for her before she even arrived. A group of young women stood waiting near the well, their brightly woven skirts swaying in the breeze. One of them, the wealthiest man's daughter, spotted her carrying the firewood and smirked. "Look, the farmer's mule comes again," she sneered. "Tell us, girl, do you even know what it means to be a woman? Or are you only born to carry burdens?" The others laughed, their bracelets jingling as they clapped in mock amusement. One girl stepped forward, plucked a piece of wood from her bundle, and waved it in the air. "Here, take this stick and beat the soil. It's the only thing that listens to you." They threw the firewood back at her feet, laughing harder as the bundle scattered. The farmer's daughter bent slowly, her hands trembling as she picked up each piece, but this time her silence was different. Something inside her had shifted. Her heart pounded with humiliation, but behind the tears rising in her eyes, a spark of fire burned. She no longer wanted to endure. She no longer wanted to bow her head. That night, sitting beside her father in their small hut, she finally spoke. Her voice was steady, though her heart ached. "Father," she began, "I cannot stay here any longer." Her father looked at her, weary eyes filled with worry. "This is our home, my child. Where would you go?" She lifted her chin. "Anywhere the laughter cannot reach me. Anywhere I can build a life where I'm more than their joke. You always told me I have strength. Now I must use it. I will make something of myself, and when I return they will see me differently." Her father's hands trembled as he gripped hers. He wanted to stop her, to protect her from the unknown, but he saw the determination in her eyes, a fire he could not extinguish. With a heavy sigh he whispered, "Then go, my daughter. Take my blessing with you. May the ancestors guide your path." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, the farmer's daughter wrapped her few belongings in a cloth, kissed her father's hand, and walked away from the only home she had ever known. As she disappeared down the dusty road, villagers noticed. They whispered among themselves, "Where is she going?" One asked with mock curiosity, another shrugged. "Let her go. She'll be back soon, broken, defeated, crawling like the rest of her kind." Laughter followed their cruel predictions. No one believed she could survive beyond the fields. To them, she was nothing, just a poor farmer's child chasing an impossible dream. But as she walked farther, each step felt like a silent promise. She did not know where the road would lead or what trials awaited her, but she carried her father's blessing in her heart and her pain like a shield. The villagers thought they had seen the last of her. To them, she had vanished into nothingness, but in truth she was stepping into her destiny. And when she returned, it would not be as the poor farmer's daughter they mocked, but as someone they would never dare laugh at again. The farmer's daughter walked for days, her bare feet blistered, her stomach empty more often than full. Yet each step carried her farther from the laughter that had haunted her since childhood. When she finally reached the bustling city, the noise, lights, and sheer size of it nearly overwhelmed her. At first, life was crueler than the fields she had left behind. She slept in the market stalls, often going hungry. Traders brushed her aside, muttering, "Go back to your village, girl. The city is no place for the likes of you." Still, she refused to turn back. One morning, she noticed a group of women carrying baskets into a tailor's shop. Out of desperation, she offered to help carry their loads. The shopkeeper, impressed by her strength and humility, allowed her to sweep the floors in exchange for scraps of food. This small chance became her lifeline. Day after day, she worked, washed, cleaning, running errands, sewing loose threads when no one was watching. At night, long after the shop closed, she would stay behind, practicing stitches on scraps of cloth. Her fingers bled, but she pressed on. Slowly, she learned the art of tailoring. Months turned into years. The once mocked farmer's daughter grew into a skilled young woman. Her clothes were still simple, but her posture was no longer bent in shame. Customers began to notice her talent. "Who made this?" they asked, marveling at the neat patterns. The shopkeeper, impressed, allowed her to design small pieces. With each success, her confidence blossomed, but tailoring was only the beginning. On her way home each night, she would pass a small school where children studied by lantern light. She stood outside, listening to the teacher's lessons through the open windows. Letters, numbers, words she did not understand, all called to her. One evening, the teacher spotted her. "Child," he asked kindly, "why do you stand out there in the cold?" She lowered her eyes. "Because I want to learn, but I have no money." The teacher, moved by her determination, allowed her to sit in the corner of the classroom. She studied harder than anyone, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, whispering every lesson to herself until it sank deep into her mind. Years of hardship passed this way. By day she worked, by night she studied. She endured hunger, loneliness, and exhaustion, but never let go of her dream. And every night, before closing her eyes, she whispered a promise to herself. "One day, I will return, and no one will laugh again." She was no longer just a farmer's daughter. She was shaping herself into something greater, a woman of skill, wisdom, and quiet power. What the villagers believed was her downfall was, in truth, her rebirth. And the secret she carried grew stronger each day, a secret that would silence every mocking voice when she finally walked back into the village. 5 years passed. Seasons changed. Harvests came and went. Yet the villagers rarely spoke of the farmer's daughter except to mock her memory. Do you remember the silly girl who thought she could escape her fate? They laughed at the well. She's probably begging on some city street by now. Others sneered. Her father, though older and weaker, kept quiet hope in his heart. Every evening he sat outside his hut staring at the horizon, whispering, "My child will return." Then, one hot afternoon, the village square fell into chaos. A strange sound echoed down the dusty road, the smooth hum of an engine unlike anything the villagers had heard before. Children ran ahead, shouting. Women dropped their baskets. Men shaded their eyes. A sleek black car rolled into the square, shining like nothing the village had ever seen. Dust swirled in its wake. It stopped before the well, and the driver stepped out to open the door. From inside, a woman emerged. She wore a long, flowing dress, her posture straight, her steps graceful. Her skin glowed with health, her hands no longer rough and calloused but adorned with rings that caught the sunlight. A hush fell over the crowd. "Who is she?" one woman whispered. "Some rich lady from the city," another guessed. "No, she looks familiar," an elder murmured, squinting. The elegant woman's eyes scanned the crowd. Slowly, deliberately, she walked toward the center of the square. The villagers shifted nervously, unsure whether to greet her or keep silent. Then, like a spark in dry grass, realization spread. Gasps rippled, mouths fell open, whispers grew into stunned cries. It's her. The farmer's daughter. The same people who once mocked her now stood frozen, their laughter trapped in their throats. Children who once threw stones hid behind their mothers' skirts. Neighbors who sneered at her patched clothes now lowered their eyes in shame. Her father pushed through the crowd, his hands trembling. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "My child, is it truly you?" She dropped to her knees and embraced him, her voice steady yet soft. "Yes, Father. I kept my promise. I told you I would return." For a moment the square was silent. Even the birds seemed to pause. Then the murmurs began again, this time filled with awe. How did she become this? What happened in the city? Look at her. She's no longer one of us and she's greater. But she silenced them with a single look. Calm, unshaken. "I was once the girl you laughed at," she said, her voice carrying across the square. "The one you called poor, unworthy, nothing. You mocked my clothes, my hands, my dreams. But I carried your words as fuel. Every insult became a step. Every humiliation became my strength. And today," she gestured toward the car, the fine clothes, the life she had built. "Today I stand before you, not to boast but to show you what perseverance creates." The villagers shifted, ashamed. No one dared meet her eyes. She had returned not as the broken girl they predicted, but as the woman they never believed she could be. Her presence alone was enough to shatter their arrogance. And deep within the silence, every villager wondered the same thing. What secret had transformed her life so completely? The village square was heavy with silence, every eye fixed on the farmer's daughter who had returned as a woman transformed. Her father stood proudly at her side, his weathered hands clutching hers as if to prove she was real. The murmurs grew louder. What happened to her? How did she change? Where did she go? Finally, she raised her hand and the crowd quieted. "You want to know my secret?" she began, her voice calm yet commanding. "I will tell you." She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the very people who once mocked her patched dress and calloused palms. "When I left this village, I carried nothing but my father's blessings and the memory of your laughter. I worked in the city, at first scrubbing floors, carrying loads, washing dishes, but I never forgot the humiliation you poured on me. I promised myself I would turn every cruel word into his lowered their heads in shame. Little by little I studied. I learned to read, to write, to count numbers greater than the crops in your fields. I saved every coin, no matter how small. I invested, I traded, I built, and with time, my work grew into something greater than I ever imagined. Today I own businesses that stretch across cities. The wealth you see is not a gift. It is the fruit of my labor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth. Men who once mocked her for being just a farmer's child now looked at the ground, ashamed. But she wasn't finished. "You mocked me for my father's land," she continued, her voice firm. "You said it was worthless, that it would only grow weeds. Yet today that same land belongs to me. Not just my father's small plot, but the very fields you once bragged about. Every corner of soil you despise me for is now under my name." Her words struck like thunder. The villagers exchanged glances filled with disbelief and guilt. Tears welled in the eyes of the farmer. He had endured their ridicule for years, and now his daughter's triumph stood as his vindication. One elder stepped forward, trembling. "Child, we were blind. We judged you by rags, not by spirit. We mocked you because we did not see the fire burning within." She looked at him, not with anger, but with calm strength. "You all turned your backs when I was nothing. Now you bow your heads because I became something. But remember, and my worth was always here. It was never in the clothes I wore nor the food I ate, but in the strength you chose not to see." The square fell silent again, but this time it was not with mockery. It was with shame, regret, and awe. And so the farmer's daughter revealed her truth. A secret forged not by magic but by resilience. In that moment, the village realized their cruelty had been their blindness. And her triumph was their lesson. The farmer's daughter stood tall in the village square, her elegant dress shining in the sun, but it was not her wealth that made the villagers tremble. It was her strength. They waited for her judgment, some expecting her to turn her back on them just as they had once done to her. But then, she looked around at the faces of the people who had mocked her, the same faces now filled with guilt and shame. She took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm. "I do not return to mock you as you mocked me," she said. "I return to remind you of a truth. Wealth and status are never the measure of a person's worth. You laughed at me because my clothes were torn and my hands were rough. Yet it was those same hands that built everything I am today." Her father's eyes shone with tears as he watched his daughter, no longer the timid child who once endured insults in silence, but a woman who had found her voice. The villagers bowed their heads. Some wept quietly. An old woman whispered, "We judged too quickly. We forgot that the seed planted in poor soil can still grow into a mighty tree." The daughter smiled softly, though her voice carried the weight of years of pain. "I forgive you," she said, "but let this forgiveness be your lesson. Never again look down upon someone because they are poor. For poverty is not weakness, and humility is not shame." The girl you mocked carried a secret called determination, and that was something no one could take away. The crowd was silent. In their silence lay the heavy truth, a truth that would echo for years to come. Children who once threw stones now clutched their mother's hands. Men who once sneered now felt small. Women who once gossiped now hid their faces. She returned not with anger but with strength, not with revenge but with wisdom. And so her story became a mirror, showing the village the cost of pride and the power of perseverance. If you were in her place, would you forgive those who mocked you? Or would you teach them a harsher lesson? The screen fades, leaving the audience with the question burning in their hearts.